Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Okay, yeah, just making sure we're alive. Okay, good. This is Sabbath morning. This is a day to be alive in Jesus. It's good to be here. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to take a little look this morning in the book of Esther. And there is a reason for that. I'll share in just a moment here. I'm going to, as my custom is, I'm going to ask the Lord to speak simply here, and that we'll go away with a greater appreciation with the book of Esther this morning. Father in heaven, we thank you now for your word and the chance to examine it together. And I pray that we will go away knowing that you have explained things to us here. And if there are any questions, I pray that those can be answered according to your word. And that we would see how all these wonderful, these rich stories in the Old Testament are not simply true, they are instructive, and they are also especially important for those of us living at the end of this world's history. They all, in some way or another, typify events in the end. They give us an idea of what is to come and the response that you will get from your people. So teach us this morning that we can be faithful, that we can grow more and more into your likeness until we shine like the noonday sun. We thank you in the name of Jesus now. Amen. All right. Well, we are going to take a look here at Esther. Who here has read the story of Esther maybe in the last year or so? Is it fresh on anybody's memory? Okay, some. All right. Is there anybody who has not yet read the book of Esther? Hey, okay, good. I'm glad that you're honest. There's probably others. Maybe you will inspire others to be honest. But Esther is a story that when I was young, and my Christian experience as a child, I would say was minimal. But it was not a story that I was familiar with. I hadn't heard of it until I became an adult, got hold of a Bible, and I thought, I thought the only book that was named after a woman was Ruth. I had heard that one. I didn't know anything about Esther. And as I read it, I thought, okay, this is pretty interesting, And so this morning, we're going to look at Esther, by no means all of Esther, but we're going to look at a portion of it, the beginning right here, and see what precious lessons we have right here. And so I've entitled this The Star. We just finished The Stand, and it seemed like The Star would be appropriate. So we'll, look at that in just a second. What just happened there? It was on. There we go, okay. And so here are just a few pictures that coincide with the story of Esther right there. And we'll see those as we go along. But it all is to tell us about Jesus. Which brings us to something kind of interesting about it. But before we do that, I just wanted to mention a couple of little things here. A reminder, we've had plugs, we're going to have another plug. Eva Tompkins, this coming Sabbath, a week from today, invite your friends. Super interesting for everybody. 11 o'clock and 2 o'clock with a meal in between. So you can see how digital currency and the like can play into the end time events. And again, also, 2 weeks from tomorrow, we're going to have Dr. Markham and Patty Dmitriev coming in, sort of a double whammy here, to answer health questions, give free health consultations, as well as to share how to have healthy cooking and how to make it taste good, because it can be done. And when you get used to it, it's far better than what is not. And I know some of you are thinking, yeah, right. But it's true. Once your taste buds adjust, it's so much better, and it can be done well. The samples will be the convincing proof. Also, I just thought I would mention this. We're supposed to have it mentioned next week, but I like to do some of these things in advance. Next week, there's going to be an offering, but since usually your offerings are made out before you hear the offering, I just wanted to let you know, next week, August 9th, the special offering is going to be for Christian Record Services. Do you know what segment of the population they focus on? Yeah, the blind. And that's one that most of us don't think a whole lot about. I mean, everybody here has eyes. Some of us have glasses, some don't. But we all see. None of us have blindness. And so we don't want to forget about that. So there is a video. They're supposed to show it next week. So I'll give that to whoever needs it. It has a little QR code. Watch a little 3-minute video about that, little story to go with it. But yes, we want to not forget those that have things with them that most of us don't suffer with. So we'll have that. And one last thing. Sometimes it's nice to recognize folks when they do good things for people. And so I just wanted today to give a special thank you to some of our own right here who are helping our sister church, Clinton Lawrence. She's small. Things are getting in place, though, to get kind of turned around. But there are a few folks that have kind of gone out of their way to really help. And so it's kind of nice when one church helps another. So I thought I would just mention one isn't here, and that's because he's over at Clinton Lawrence. And so Charlie has been helping a good bit there, just attending almost every week and also speaking a lot, doing what he can to encourage folks. And then also, too, that are here but have been doing quite a bit of work behind the scenes. You don't get to get by without being recognized. So Skip and Roger, thank you for getting a lot of the infrastructure in place, getting it kind of cleaned up, doing things that all I know is, okay, that's broken, but I don't know what to do. So anyways, thank you. We do appreciate that. And if any of you have special gifts or interested in maybe kind of helping to, spend a little time, kind of help turn that boat around, please come on over. It's going to be fun. The Lord has good things in store for both of these churches. Anyways, let's take a look at the book of Esther this morning and see what the Lord can teach us here. One thing that's interesting about this book, every chapter of every book tells us about Jesus. But the curious thing about Esther is that you can search it from the first word to the last word, and you will never find the word God. That's odd. You will also never find the Lord, all capitals, Yahweh, Jehovah. No such mention. That's kind of odd. As a matter of fact, you won't find capital L, lowercase O-R-D, Adonai. You won't find that either. And so a natural question is, well, so if I don't see God, Jehovah, Adonai, if I don't see it mentioned, how am I supposed to learn about God? How do you think you might learn about God if he's not mentioned by name at all? Got any ideas? Hopefully everyone's in great suspense. Kind of deer in the headlights is like, I don't know. It turns out there's also another book like that, extra credit for you. I'm not sure if I should tell you or if I should let you look. Probably should tell you because I might forget. There's another book in the Old Testament where you don't find any of these direct mentions of God. I'll give you a hint. It's by somebody who squandered most of his life, his adult life, and then turned back to God. Who would that be? Solomon. And which book kind of deals with the lessons he learned from a squandered life? No, not Proverbs. No, Ecclesiastes. Yeah, you can search that one as well, and it's like, it's kind of odd, but it's true. But what it means, the way to learn about God in such circumstances is you dig extra close. And you say, well, he's not on the surface. He must be down here somewhere. And then you begin to see him everywhere. He makes himself known not only by his name, but the things that he does. And if you learn elsewhere in Scripture what he does, you begin to see the same things going on in Esther. So we'll see that. Okay. I'm not big into giving a ton of history, but just so you kind of have some idea where in the scheme of time this has taken place. Y'all remember Cyrus? Cyrus was the king of Persia, right? And by the way, I'm going to bring out this again. We had this during the stand. I'll put it on this side this time. Which one of the which one of the metals represented Persia? The silver. You notice I even wore a silver tie. I did that on purpose because I thought we want to direct our attention to Medo-Persia today. And so Cyrus, he was the first king of Persia following Darius the Mede for 2 years. But Cyrus was the first king of Persia while Persia was reigning in relation to the people of God. He had a son, Cambyses, who reigned about 7.5 years. Then he had a ne'er-do-well who came in and tried to say, well, I want to be king too. And he wasn't a real king. He was the false Smyrtus. And then you get to a fellow named Darius Hystaspes, that Darius is different than Darius the Mede. So this one's after Cyrus. That Cyrus there and that Darius are the ones you read about in the book of Esther that helped kind of forward the work, get things starting there in the days of Ezra and getting things going there with the temple being rebuilt. But then the next king is this Xerxes the First. That's the fellow that you know in the book of Esther called Ahasuerus. So that's who that is, and that's where he is in the stream of time. After him comes another famous fellow, Artaxerxes. That's the one with Ezra 7, the decree to the one that's in Daniel chapter 9 about rebuilding, the 70 weeks and all that. So that's where we are. So Xerxes, Esther, actually, if you were to look at the book of Ezra, the first 6 chapters are leading up to Esther. The last 4 chapters come after Esther. So Esther is sandwiched right there in the middle of Ezra. That's where it is time-wise. So that's all our history for today. We're done with that. And then a connection here with the book of Daniel. We had said that Medo-Persia, this silver right here, in many ways typified things that are true, that we know to be true about the United States from Revelation 13. And we had looked at Daniel 11 and made a case that the king of the south, as it's referred to right there, it was described as a ram that butts, just like it was doing for Persia there in Daniel 8. And this government is going to work with the king of the north, the papacy in the end times. The reason I point that out is simply this. The book of Esther takes place in the days of Persia. Hence, if we look at it closely, maybe we can learn some things that will be true of our country in the end. We all live in this country, so it would just make sense to learn all we can. So that's all that I'm going to say about that. So now, let's get into the book itself here. You'll notice right here, I've got it right on the screen, but in Ezra chapter 1 at verse 2, it says, "In those days, when the king Ahasuerus, Xerxes the First, when he sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan the palace." Some of your versions, they may translate it as Susa, same thing. But even that right there, we might say, why did he highlight Shushan the citadel? That doesn't seem like the most important thing. The reason I did that is because we just saw that recently in looking at Daniel. If you'd been paying close attention, you might say, oh yeah, I remember that. Then again, it may have been one of many details and you didn't. So here it is. Daniel chapter 8, verse 2. Daniel says, "I saw in a vision, and it came to pass when I saw, then I was in Shushan the citadel." Okay. And interestingly enough, what follows is the vision of the ram that represents Persia. Okay. So we have same phrase in 2 different books, both telling us to look toward Medo-Persia. Okay, enough on that. As you drop down in chapter 1, you get to verse 11 right here, and perhaps you remember the story. Artaxerxes had this fantastically big party for 180 days with all the big shots. And then if you weren't a big shot, there was another party for 7 days for all the other people. And perhaps he had had something to drink. I don't know for sure. It was flowing for everybody else. But then he thought it might be a good idea to invite his wife out. So he said he commanded to bring Vashti the queen before the king with the crown royal to show the people and the princes her beauty. And the reason was because she was what? Fair to look on. Okay. So he's going to exhibit her beauty. Now, it doesn't say exactly what that was going to be like, but, you know, for worldlings, you can probably have some idea. It probably wasn't a family-friendly affair. So, but it does say she was fair to look on. It's the same phrase we saw in Daniel. At the beginning of the book of Daniel, what it introduced us to the captivity and those who were brought into captivity, the king had said that they were to bring some of the sons of Israel. from the seed of royalty and nobility, in whom was no blemish, those who were of good appearance. We emphasize that word appearance in our study of Daniel. It turns out that Esther too is of good appearance. What we found in the book of Daniel was that, yes, it started on just saying that they were good looking. They were handsome young men. But as the story progressed, we found that, not only were they physically attractive, but having invited Jesus in, because he wants to appear in us, their characters were truly attractive. So there was the appearance of Jesus later in the book, and he wants to appear in his people. Here, in the story of Esther, yes, she was a beautiful young maiden, but it also, by connection with Daniel, suggests that just maybe she had a truly exquisite character. And that's exactly what the story is going to bring on for us. The last verse we're going to consider from chapter 1 is in verse 19. You remember that the king had ordered her to come, his wife, but she refused to come, probably because she knew the nature of the exhibition, and there was a lot of alcohol flowing, and she didn't want to put herself in a bad light. She knew it wasn't right. Well, of course, if you're the king and you've got everybody who's in town coming, that didn't look too good for him. And so he got really bent out of shape, wondered, well, what do we do? Well, there was a suggestion made. If it please the king, let there go a royal commandment from him. Let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, that it be not altered, that Vashti come no more before King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal estate unto another that is better than she. And you'll notice I've highlighted the law of the Persians and the Medes to be not altered. That phrase also appeared in the book of Daniel. I believe it's in the book of Ezra as well. There it says the law of the Medes and the Persians, the same thing. Every time you see that phrase, it's always connected with that it be not changed, or that it be not altered. Literally, that it not pass away. And what was interesting there is that Medo-Persia, in a small way, typified God and his kingdom, because God's law, of course, is written in stone. Even today in modern English, secular context, if something is set in stone, that means what? It is. There's no getting around it. God's law was literally written in stone. It lasts forever. There's been no changes in the Ten Commandments. And in fact, even right here on this statue, we've got this blue stone. We made a case that the Ten Commandments were made out of sapphire stone from the base of God's throne. His kingdom is that which will never pass away. And so Medo-Persia is, in this sense, like God, at least claiming to have a law that doesn't change. Now, of course, in many ways, Medo-Persia was not like God, but in this sense, it was. So all of that you want fresh in your mind to understand the book of Esther and what it means to us living in this country today. Okay. Yes, and then just for reference, if you wanted to see where in Daniel you have that phrase, it's in Daniel 6, where Daniel was tossed into the lion's den. There was the decree made that if you were to pray to any god or man except you, O king, Darius, to be thrown into the den of lions. But it makes mention of the law of the Medes and Persians, which altereth not. Okay, so there's our connection with the book of Daniel. Let's get more into the story now. So we're going to compare Esther here with Daniel. If you take a look here in Esther, and that should say chapter 2, by the way, verses 2 through 7. Little typo there. But if you turn in your Bible to Esther chapter 2, you'll notice right here, King Ahasuerus has had a little time to cool off, think things through here. Then in verse 2 it says, Then said the king's servants that ministered unto him, Let there be fair young virgins sought for the king. And let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather together all the fair young virgins unto Shushan the palace, the citadel, to the house of the women, unto the custody of Hege, the king's chamberlain, keeper of the women. Let their things for purification be given them. Now, being a good pagan king, Xerxes might be thinking, that sounds like a pretty good plan. I've dismissed one wife who embarrassed me publicly. Now I'll just get a bunch of young virgins. That ought to really fix things. Well, that's how he's thinking anyways. And then it says in verse 4, let the maiden which pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. The thing pleased the king, and he did so. So we are introduced to this plan right here. And what we notice is that, it's similar to what happened in the book of Daniel. In Daniel chapter 1, notice and see if this sounds to you to be about the same. Daniel chapter 1, verses 4 and 15, we read this. Here it is. Children in whom was no blemish, but well favored, skillful in all wisdom, cunning in knowledge, understanding science, or essentially all academic areas, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. Okay, and then again, verse 15, at the end of the 10 days, their countenances appeared fairer, fatter in flesh than all the children which did eat the portion of the king's food. Okay, so that's what's happening there with Daniel. And you're thinking, how is that similar to what we read in Esther? Because of this. You'll notice the last verse I have on the screen there for Esther is Esther 2, verse 7. And right there, we're introduced right here to Esther. This was our verse this morning. It mentions this fellow named Mordecai, and he brought up Hadassah, which refers to a myrtle tree. And then her Persian name was Esther, his uncle's daughter. For she had neither father nor mother. The maid was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, when her father and her mother were dead, took for his own daughter. Right there when it says that she was fair and beautiful, yes, she was like the youth that had no blemish in them. They were just beautiful to look on right there. Literally, they were all of them of good appearance. Now, of course, the main appearance that matters is what Jesus looks on. He looks on the inward man, not on the outward. But their outward appearance was what would catch people's attention, but later would be expanded to show you that their inner character was in harmony with Jesus right there. Also, you'll notice something here about Mordecai. It says that Mordecai right there, he brought up Esther. And the reason that he brought her up was because, what did she lack, according to this verse? Yeah, her father and her mother evidently had died. I don't know if they were killed or they just passed away. What had happened? But somehow, she was an orphan. And the Bible is very clear that God has a very soft spot for the widow, for the orphan, and also for the oppressed. The ones that society throws away because they just don't have the stuff that attracts attention. The ones that seem to be to use today's phrase, the so-called useless eaters. Well, she was in that camp. But Mordecai, he said, you have no one. And he took her. And so you realize that he's modeling Jesus right there. He says, yeah, I'm going to adopt you as my own. And we're called to be adopted sons and daughters of God. So both Mordecai and Esther are going to shine for him here. So there's a little picture right there, just an AI picture, but shows Mordecai, somewhat advanced in years perhaps. And there's this young teenage girl right there, just beautiful but in a simple way, not provocative or any such thing. Just a nice, wholesome, sweet innocence about her. One other thing, let's look at Mordecai now. Let's make a connection here with Daniel. Esther 2, verse 5, it said this. Now in Shushan, the citadel, there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Yair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. So it refers to him right there as a Jew. It doesn't just say, here's Mordecai and pay attention to him. It refers to him as a Jew specifically. But also the name is interesting because Mordecai, that's not a Jewish name. Actually, that is a Persian name. You're thinking, who cares? Because of what it means. Mordecai. Have you ever heard of Marduk? That is a pagan deity. And so guess what? Just like Daniel and his 3 friends who had their names changed to Belteshazzar, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servant of Nego. All these names were to point them toward Babylonian gods, to try to get them to become Babylonians at heart, to worship Babylonian gods. Well, that continued on, past Babylonian captivity, on into the Persian days. Mordecai was a name change. He still would have had a Jewish name, but when he was in a mixed crowd and dealing with them, he went by a name that pointed to Marduk of all things. So yes, he had a name change. What has this to do with Daniel? Well, we just said their names were changed, but also it pointed out very distinctly that those children were Jews. And we met that again when they came into conflict. Chapter 6, chapter 3. Oh, those Jews over there, they're not doing the way that the law is commanded. It's telling us right here, he is a Jew. He is a Jew at heart. We've already seen he's a Jew inwardly because he cared for an orphan girl the way Jesus would. And so he's going to find himself in some conflict here. Something else about Esther here. Esther 2, verse 7. Let's look at that verse again right here. It said that she was fair and beautiful right there. She had a name change. Hadassah, that was her Jewish name, pointed to the beautiful tree, the myrtle tree. It got changed to Esther, and that is most definitely a pagan name. There's a lot of words from the Bible that you might say, oh, okay, yeah, it's the same thing. Have you heard of Ashtaroth in the Bible? Okay. That's the same as you've heard of maybe Ishtar, like in Babylon, they'll talk about the Ishtar gates, the blue bricks, and has the winged lions on it and all that. I think Saddam Hussein was attempting to try to kind of rebuild Babylon, didn't get too far. That's what that is. The holiday, Easter, the name comes from Ishtar. All of those are simply, you've heard of a flower. Who here has heard of the flower called an aster? That's a common flower, right? Do you know what the name aster means? It's got the 5 little things on it. It's a star. So her name was changed to a star. Now, no doubt, because it was a pagan society, that would have been in honor of the stars. The Bible talks again and again about those who would worship sun, moon, and stars. But then again, God can direct and say, well, sure, you meant it for one thing. I can mean it for another. Because the stars in the Bible also are significant of angels, God's angels, messengers. And maybe Esther is being introduced to us as a star, a messenger, one who will light up like the stars of heaven as Jesus' character is developed in her. But yeah, she had a name change just like those in Babylon, Daniel and his friends. Also, you'll notice here in chapter 2, let's see what it says here about Esther. Remember, all the young ladies had been brought before the king. They'd be given a time to get themselves done up and prepared. And then they would be escorted one at a time before the king, and he could just have his pick, whoever, tickled his fancy. Well, notice what it says about Esther here in verse 9. It says that the maiden, Esther, she pleased him, that is the king. She obtained kindness of him. Oh, sorry, not the king. Excuse me. The man in charge of all the youth. She obtained kindness of him, and he speedily gave her her things for purification, with such things as belonged to her, and 7 maidens, which were meet to be given her, out of the king's house. He preferred her and her maids unto the best place of the house of the women. Something about Esther won this particular official's admiration. He said, you know, I kind of like you. I'm just going to favor you and give you the best place, everything you need. I'm going to work with you. And then she went through the many months of preparation, and then the day came that she was to go before the king. Well, notice, it says in verse 17 that the king loved Esther above all the women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. So notice, Esther had won favor with this somebody much lower down the totem pole, the one who had charge of all the women. He won his favor, and then later she won the king's favor. Does that sound like anybody in the book of Daniel? Who does that sound like? Yeah, Daniel, and for that matter, his 3 friends. Because in Daniel chapter 1, when they stood for principal, they, in a very polite way, asked, would you be kind enough to test us to see if the diet we would like, if that'll work? You know, because I know you don't understand these things, so just test us. The test was permitted, and because they'd asked for it in a sweet way, it was granted. And so Daniel was said to have earned favor with that gentleman. And then later, they all won the favor of King Nebuchadnezzar because they had been faithful. So we see the same thing occurring now, this time with a young lady. Doesn't say her age, but who knows? Maybe she was about the same age as those youth, 18 years. So anyways, yeah, she won his favor. It's the same as in Daniel 1, verse 9. Okay. There she is getting all dolled up, I guess, for her presentation to the king. One last comment on Mordecai right here. It's found in Esther chapter 2, but notice here in verse 19. It says, when the virgins were gathered together the second time, then Mordecai sat in the king's gate. That, again, is like Daniel. If you were to look in Daniel chapter 2, you will see that he sat in the king's gate. This was after interpreting the dream, and the king was wowed and said, I can't believe that. You knew my dream, all the details. You gave me the interpretation. He elevated him very quickly to a high position in his kingdom. And so we find out that, wow, Daniel's experience in Babylon is just point for point, like Esther and Mordecai there in Persia. Okay. One key detail at the end of chapter 2 that will play a role in coming weeks as we look at the book of Esther is this. At the very end of the chapter, in chapter 2, notice this. Verse 21, it says this. And let's see, did I put this on the screen here? I just made reference to it, but it says this. In those days, while Mordecai sat in the king's gate, 2 of the king's chamberlains, his officials, Bigthan and Teresh, of those who kept the door, were wroth. That means they were angry. And they sought to lay hand on the king Ahasuerus. Now this thing was known to Mordecai, who told it unto Esther the queen. Then Esther certified the king thereof in Mordecai's name. When inquisition was made of the matter, it was found out. Therefore they were both hanged on a tree, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles before the king. Now this we want to look at here. Notice it says that these 2 men, you gotta be really sure of yourself before you decide to take out a king, because they have people to deal with this kind of stuff. And sure enough, they were found out, and it didn't go well for them. But it's easy to misunderstand what happened to them. It says they were hanged on a tree. And you might think, well, okay. Later we'll talk about a gallows and everything. So you might be thinking, okay, yeah, one of those platforms, on the floor drops out and the rope goes down and snaps your neck and you die. That almost assuredly is not what is in view here. Let's see what it is. If you go to Deuteronomy, that's where you first are introduced to this possibility, this kind of death. And it says right there in Deuteronomy 21, God said something about that. In Deuteronomy chapter 21, the last 2 verses of that chapter, it says that if a man have committed a sin worthy of death, and he be put to death, and you hang him on a tree, his body is not to remain all night. Notice it says, upon the tree. See, if you hang somebody by the neck like we're accustomed to thinking, you're not on the tree, you're just sort of hanging from a branch. It says he's not to remain all night upon the tree, but you shall in any wise bury him that day, for he that is hanged is what? He is accursed of God. Okay. You're thinking, well, what does that tell us? Well, you see, that's interesting because Paul in Galatians 3:13 applies that to Jesus. He bare our sins on the tree. And when he was put to death on the tree, what manner of death was it? It's crucifixion, right? He was literally attached to the tree. The spikes were in somewhere his hands or his wrists, likewise his feet. He was attached to the tree. And he was then removed from the tree, lest he stay all night upon the tree, as we're told not to do in Deuteronomy 21. Well, that same expression, being hanged on the tree, is what's used in Esther 2. So the question becomes, well, were they hanged like, in a Western or something, hanging from their neck, or were they hanged something more like, like a cross? Well, that's where we can suspect maybe that it's like crucifixion, but, we look to the historians to tell us. So let me just give you what a couple of, respected commentaries out there, what they say, and so we'll just run with that. The ESV, that's the English Standard Version, that's one of your more recent Bibles, past 20 years or so. They have a study Bible, and if you read their notes on these very verses, here's what it says, referring specifically to Esther 2, verse 23. It says where they translated as a tree, which it is, what it is. It says it could be translated as a wooden beam or a stake. The Hebrew word simply means tree or wood. This Persian execution practice involved affixing or impaling a person on a stake or a pole. Okay. So, similar to crucifixion. Maybe not a cross. In this case, maybe it's more like maybe just a pole. Okay. But yes, being nailed to it, run through on it, and dying a very horrible death. I remember in seminary they had mentioned this, that crucifixion didn't just start with Rome. Satan had been developing this through the centuries and kind of getting really good at it, I guess you might say. So by the time Jesus came around, he really had it just horrible. Another Bible out here, this is a Catholic Bible. This is the New American Bible. It's the standard one for English-speaking people in North America. And let's see what they say. Referring again to this particular verse. Impaled on stakes, a method of execution used by the Persians known from ancient records and reliefs. So yeah, you didn't fool around with the Persians. You got on the wrong side of the law. Yeah, so it wasn't a quick death by snapping your neck. Not that that would be desirable, but it might be not as excruciating. But yeah, that was the kind of death there. So apparently our gentleman here, Big Fan and Teresh, yeah, they were impaled. They had a gruesome death. And we'll want to bear that in mind to appreciate what's going on here. But you see, they were truly guilty of sin. They had conspired against the king, right? And they were cursed. And of course, Jesus, by contrast, did nothing to deserve death, but willingly took on the death we do deserve, and was hanged on a tree and bore the curse that we otherwise would bear. So even in the death of these two gentlemen, as we compare with all the scripture, we see that, oh yeah, it's kind of like Jesus, except these two bore their own sin. Okay. The last thing we're going to look at here, because we're going to do about like 4 different looks at Esther over the coming weeks. But to finish out today's look, we're going to look at a decree that was made. And again, the idea is to compare it to stuff happening at the end of time. So in Esther 3, and I put all the verses on the screen here for you, it says here, there was a fellow named Haman, and Haman was very proud, but I guess he did good work for a season, and he won the favor of this king Ahasuerus. So Ahasuerus made him second in command. He was his lieutenant. But he was really arrogant, and he liked it when people would bow and, oh, yes, great Haman, oh, yes, Haman. But you see, one of the people that would have been expected to bow to him was Mordecai. But Mordecai was a true, faithful Jew. And when Haman saw that Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence, Haman was full of wrath. And he thought scorn to lay hands on Mordecai alone. He said, oh no, I'm going to really get him. I hate him, but you know what? I heard he's a Jew. I'm going to get rid of all the Jews. They had showed him the people of Mordecai. Wherefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews. They were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, even the people of Mordecai. So one particular person sparked desire, but because he's so wicked, he said, you know what? I'm just going to get them all. And of course, Satan suggested that, because what Satan wants to do is get rid of all who have the true knowledge of God and are faithful. So he's the one whose venom is inside of Haman, saying, use this as an excuse to get rid of them all. But that's just like Daniel chapter 6, which took place in Medo-Persia. And all those people conspired and said, oh, let there be a decree made. Let there be a decree made, O king, that anybody who prays to anybody, asks a petition of anybody but you, O king, for 30 days, let it be thrown to the den of lions. It appealed to the king's vanity. And then, of course, they kept an eye out for Daniel, and oh, there he is. Okay. And they decided, you know what? We're going to destroy him. We're going to get him thrown to the lions. So it's the same thing here. This time it's on a bigger scale, though. It's going to go from one person to a whole host of people. But we saw how in Daniel 6 that story right there actually prefigured the end time conflict. Remember we saw the Sabbath Sunday issue come up when we looked at the lion's den? If not, you can go back and watch that presentation there. Maybe this has something to do with it. But let's see. It says here, in the first month, the month Nisan, 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast Pur, that is the lot, before Haman from day to day, from month to month, on up to the 12th month. That is the month Adar. So they're casting it on this day, and they're trying to decide which month it'll be until it arrived at the 12th month. That's what it's saying right there. And it's funny that they did this in the first month of the year, the Hebrew year. I wonder why they might do it on the first month. Well, that's Passover time. And they're plotting a death decree. Jesus, the Passover lamb, was selected for him there. And when the Passover hours ended, then you would eat the Passover meal. And he then instituted Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, gave way to communion, and we still use unleavened bread. And he died that very day. It says that they cast lots there. Very interesting language. The lot was also cast on the Day of Atonement. One for the Lord's goat, one for Satan's goat. So Day of Atonement language. Again, just tossing out an idea. We'll develop it later, but it's there. It's one of the important ideas. And then here's the crux of the matter. Haman said to the king, there's a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from all people. And they don't keep the king's laws either. Therefore, it is not for the king's profit or benefit to suffer them, to permit them to do so. So he's presenting it as, yeah, they're just troublemakers. Be better off just getting rid of them. They're just a problem. But that last part, not for the king's prophet to suffer them, it says literally to give them rest. Can't be doing that, king. Interesting. Methinks it might have something to do with the end time. I think you should be able to figure out what. You can look that up, though. It's the same word as Noah. Nuach is rest. Interesting. And this fellow Haman, this bad man, is defined as the Jews' enemy. He's the Jews' enemy. And a Jew, remember, according to Paul, is not one outwardly, but is one inwardly. If your character is absolutely faithful to Jesus, even if it puts you in conflict with laws of the land or whatever, that's a true Jew. Here was an enemy of the Jews, a professed supporter of the state, getting them to frame a law against God's people. Notice when they put this into effect. We know it was in the first month. Funny thing, it was on the 13th day of the first month. Do you know when Passover was? What day of the month was Passover? It's the 14th day. And the Feast of Unleavened Bread was the 15th. Satan worked this out. He had a pretty good idea when Jesus would die. And it just happened to come out that he anticipated the 14th and the 15th. He knew that there was a symbolic lamb to be killed on the Passover, and then the real lamb would die on the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And he said, you know what? I'm going to come a little bit anticipate. I'm going to go ahead of that. Jesus will die on time. I'm going to anticipate this with a death decree. I'm going to try to kill these people early. Because it wouldn't fit God's timeline. So he's going to do that. And the Passover was a special day because back in the book of Exodus, the word Passover would be better translated as hovering over. It's not that the angel of death would pass over somebody's home and not strike him down. Rather, as the angel of death passed through the land, whenever he came to a home where the blood was over the doorpost, God would say, excuse me, I'm hovering over this house right here. You can go right on past it. And wherever he hovered, the angel of death wouldn't strike it. But see, he's coming a day ahead of time. So it's like, before you can hover and protect your people, I'm going to kill them. That's the idea. He's putting his death decree into effect the day before God's protection, as if God couldn't protect them. But that's what he's doing. Well, when they cast lots, they did it on that day, but then when it would actually go into effect would be at the end of the year, the 12th month, 13th day again. But it's going to be a universal death decree. Strange. How are you and I going to avoid a universal death decree, you think? How are we going to avoid that? You got any plans? Can we picket and protest and lobby Congress and stuff? Is that going to work? Nope. The correct answer is you're not going to avoid a universal death decree. The only way this is going to work is if you submit and say, you've called me to die daily, I am going to go to death. And then those who seek not to save their life, if you try to save it, you'll lose it. But if you're willing to lose your life, you'll save it unto life eternal. God will walk with us. He walked with the Hebrews, right, in the fiery furnace. They didn't lose their life. If we're faithful, he says, don't you worry. And I think the last thing we wanted to note about this particular decree is that Haman was so hateful and mean that when the decree was framed, it wasn't just that you could kill all those people he couldn't stand because he really hated one person. He said, you know what, as a bonus, to make sure that everybody has a motivation to do it, he says, because you may not think anything about Jews, you could care less. He says, guess what? If you kill them, anything they have is yours. So if you kill the rich, influential ones, all their stuff is yours. That's interesting because there are many times in the Bible where God would have his people, if some wicked nation, their cup was full, there was time for him to be destroyed, he would say, yes, it's your duty. I'm telling you not to be mean, but it's just, you're going to act as my agent. Yes, you'll put them to death, but you're not to lay a finger on their belongings, because it's not to your gain. You're just putting up wicked people who don't know me out of existence. But when Satan has a decree, he says, you put a people out and you get their stuff. So this tells you the enemy is behind this plan right here. It doesn't mention Satan in the book either, but you can detect the slithering of the serpent by this. He's appealing to selfishness. God's people don't do that kind of stuff. Okay. That is the introduction to the book of Esther. We're going to leave it there. We're going to have probably about 3 more, just a couple chapters at a time. Just kind of take bite-sized portions of the story. So what do we want to take away today? What we want to see is that there's enough evidence here that this story is like what's going to happen in the last days. And you and I, we all have a chance to become either a Mordecai or an Esther. So I don't know, we'll say the men can be like Mordecai and the women can be like Esther. I guess that's fair. Both these people had their name changed, but it was only their regular name, right? Inside, their true Jewish name, how they were before God, their character, was it changed? Not at all. They were as true as the needle to the pole. They said, no, I am going to do right, period. I'm not going to bow to a wicked man if it costs me my life. I'm not going to do any such thing. Their names were interesting. While Mordecai's name was to signify worship Marduk, he said, no, I'm not going to do that. Esther, her name points to star worship. She says, no, I'm going to follow the star, Jesus Christ. And ultimately, he can shine through me. And so that's the question before us. Are we willing to let Jesus shine through us? And by the way, if he shines, does that mean, do we kind of need to put in fresh batteries and kind of crank up, put it on the highest setting? Is that how it works? How do you let light shine in you? What's that? Right. He's the the light, and he's the one that turns on the power button. And he just ramps up the intensity as you can handle it. We don't need to do anything. We just need to kind of get out of the way and quit trying to tinker with things. And as we do that, then we will be able to have the courage that we will find out that Mordecai and Esther display later in the book. Because none of us on our own has the strength to do what they will be doing naturally. All of us would say, oh, I'm getting out of here. This is getting too hot. But see, we can be faithful right there. Another thing is this. Mordecai and Esther, there's nothing that suggests that they were particularly important. But God could bring them to positions in the realm, and he says, if you're faithful, I could bring you just from Joe Average living in the XYZ subdivision, just nobody special. I could put you in the court. You could have direct access to the king. Would that be exciting to you, or would you be scared? Like in our country, like if you had access to the president, you had his ear, and you could say, oh, by the way, did you know there's a plot in your life? I just needed to tell you. Would you be comfortable, or would you think, oh man, I don't be involved in this, somebody might put me to death? But see, if God gives us those opportunities, should we seize them, you think? The people in the Bible did, and God rewarded them. He protected them. And then as they were faithful in that, he said, now I'll put you in an even more trying position. And as you're faithful, I'll deliver you. And as he does that, guess what? Our faith only grows. Instead of getting scared, we get spiritually strong. We don't get proud, but we get strong. So if you would like to be strong, maybe you feel like, well, I just feel like Esther. I'm kind of like just a teenage girl. I'm just kind of, I haven't learned all life's lessons. I'm not wise yet. Good. We're all in the same boat. But he can make us strong. And so if you would like to be in that group, I pray that you would go ahead and just bow your heads with me. We'll pray, and then we're going to have our closing song right here, which is going to be Rescue the Perishing, number 367. Matter of fact, let's stand and sing. Let's do that first, then we'll pray. Excuse me. Yeah, let's have Rescue the Perishing, number 367. Oops. Rescue the perishing, for the dying, snatch them in pity from sin and the grave. Weep o'er the erring one, lift up the fallen, tell them of Jesus the mighty to save. Rescue the perishing, care for the dying. Jesus is merciful, Jesus will save. Though they are slighting him, still he is chose that song because indeed we're going to need to remember that Jesus will rescue those who are about ready to perish, but he will give strength in time of need. We'll go ahead and close in prayer now. Father in heaven, I am grateful for the story of Esther. I'm grateful for all the stories in the scriptures, but I'm even more grateful that you can show us as we spend time with you and ask you to explain things, that we begin to see that these stories are there for a very particular purpose. Not simply to record what has happened, but to show how you behave in any situation. And we know that you are the same yesterday, today, and forever. So however it was that you have acted in regard to your people in the past, when they got in various positions that seemed impossible, whether they're bound at the Red Sea and mountains on the other side and Pharaoh's armies coming after them, or whether they're at the Jordan River and how do we cross this big flood of water, or whether we're like Esther and Mordecai and we find ourselves dealing with very wicked people at the highest levels of government. How will we respond? We can take heart because each time, as long as people were faithful, you came through. And we are grateful too for Jesus. He didn't shrink from duty. In his case, you did not deliver him. You allowed him to go all the way through unto death, to experience the agony that will be those who experience the second death. And yet he did it because it was right, and he did it out of love for others, not because he was interested in guarding his own interest. He had the interests of his creation at heart and put that above everything else. I ask that you will give us that heart so that then truly it can be said of us that love casts out fear. We will not shrink from any trial, even from death itself, if it means being faithful to you, knowing that it's right, being overjoyed at doing what's right, and not being afraid of consequences. So I ask that you will give us that strength. And as we continue to explore different segments of the story of Esther, that the story will become alive to us, that it will become very real to us. We thank you now in the name of Jesus and for his sake. Amen. All right, well, God bless you.